in order to get the translation, please click on the globe and choose the language. A few minutes ago, the joint memorial service ended, and we're still excited, perhaps moved, mixed feelings from the things we heard. Feel free to post feelings, comments, questions in the chat, and we'll try to address, Benzi will try to address, and I will try to address any questions we can. If you don't receive an answer, please your email so we can contact you. And it's very important for us that you keep in touch with us, not only on the Remembrance Day, but throughout the year. I'll just give a personal note that 7 years ago, I heard Yigal Elchanan and Ara Baramin, the two kids that their brother and sister were killed because of the violence. And they are from different sides of the conflict. They became best friends. Throughout the whole session, I was tearing an hour and a half. At the end, I asked myself, what am I doing? And since then, I became an active, non-stop in Combatants for Peace. I think that's the goal that we're looking for. Everybody becomes active. We can't stay on the side and be silent. So that said, I'll introduce Benzi. Benzi is an American. He grew up in Manhattan, and what was it? When he was like 7 years ago, or no, when he was 7, rather, he witnessed the falling of the Twin Towers in Manhattan. Since then, so this was his first encounter with violence and the meaning on violence close to home. After that, he made an aliyah, came to Israel, went to a yeshiva in Jerusalem, joined the army, did his 3-year service, and what he witnessed in his army service caused him to join Breaking the Silence. So now he's breaking the silence, spreading his story of what he saw and what he feels about how the conflict is being handled by Israel and Palestine and what we should do about it. So Benzi, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. And thank you. It's an honor to be able to speak here after such a powerful and moving ceremony. And like Eli mentioned, I am Israeli American, born and raised in New York. And when I was in 5th grade, when I was 10 years old, I saw for the first time in my life, combat aircraft, fighter jets flying over Manhattan. In the days, on the day of the September 11th attacks, and in the days and weeks that followed, every single day for weeks and weeks, there were these fighter jets flying over my neighborhood in Manhattan. And, you know, I was very young, and it was my first real exposure to violence. And for me, you know, after coming back to my family home in Lower Manhattan, you know, with all the chaos and confusion and fear in the days following those attacks, I remember those fighter jets actually made me feel safe, because I didn't know a lot about military or global politics, but I knew that those fighter jets were there to protect me and my family and everyone around me from another attack like what we had just witnessed and what we had just learned about from happening again. And 13 years later, when I was 23 years old, after I had gone through a process and found myself in Israel, studying in yeshiva and deciding to join the IDF, I once again encountered fighter jets flying over my head. And obviously this was in a different context. This was during my IDF service. where I served from 2012 to 2015 in a unit called the Sayarat Nahal. It's a special forces infantry unit. And I was inside the Gaza Strip during Operation Protective Edge. And we had entered neighborhoods, Palestinian neighborhoods in northern Gaza, close to the border. And really, before we went in and during the time we were in, there were these fighter jets flying over with a roar of their engines and dropping bombs. And obviously, as a soldier, I knew that those fighter jets are on my side and they're also protecting me. And once I got into the neighborhoods, I saw what destruction they were able to create. I saw destroyed homes and cars that were bombed or shelled. And, you know, even in one of the houses that we went through, I actually saw a Palestinian woman, an older Palestinian woman who was killed by shrapnel from one of these bombs. And we continued on to another neighborhood where we were for an entire week, advancing, going into homes. And on the last night, we were inside this neighborhood in the Palestinian city of Beit Hanun. One of the houses that soldiers were in together with me took a direct hit from an anti-tank missile, leaving many wounded and one young officer killed by a direct hit. And the other soldiers from my unit were spending the night looking and evacuating and looking for body parts. And the next morning we left that neighborhood. And once again, the Air Force fighter jets flew overhead, dropped bombs one after the other in a line. These fighter jets were flying in a line, one after the other, like kind of like a slow moving freight train. And just one after the other, dropping these enormous bombs and really destroying the entire neighborhood that we were in. Now, I knew at the time that this, I didn't know at the time, but this was actually just the final minutes before the beginning of a ceasefire. I know that now because I've read testimonies from dozens of other soldiers, around 100 other soldiers who, like me, served in this operation in the Gaza Strip in 2014, who have given testimony to breaking the silence. One of whom also served in the northern Gaza Strip and talks about the Al-Bura neighborhood, or the Sivivon neighborhood, in Hebrew it's called, in the east of Beit Hanun, which describes right after we left this neighborhood at 5:15 in the morning, the night after this soldier from my unit was killed. This is when the bombing took place. The Air Force came with exact precision. They started at 5:15 a.m. and at 6 a.m. was the beginning of the ceasefire. They dropped their last bomb at 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before the beginning of the ceasefire. And what the soldiers saw, just like I saw, we just saw a neighborhood destroyed. This other soldier describes it, other testifier describes it as seeing nothing. Like the opening scene of The Pianist, the famous photo that they always show on trips to Poland, that shows Warsaw before the war and Warsaw after the war. The photo shows the heart of Warsaw and this classy European city, and they show at the end of the war, it's the same neighborhood, only it has just one house left standing and the rest is just in ruins. And that's what this neighborhood of Beit Hanun looked like after the Air Force bombed it. Now, we spent a week in this neighborhood and we found one family in their home. Most of the residents had fled, but this one family, they stayed in their home. I didn't see them or I didn't hear about them, but I heard about them. And even my commanding officer described meeting this family when he was interviewed inside Beit Hanun on Friday, 5 days after we entered this neighborhood. He was interviewed by Israeli television. And he talked about meeting this family who had nowhere else to go and just stayed in their home. They were stuck. And luckily, really, they weren't killed when the soldiers went into their home, because we went into every single house in that neighborhood with live gunfire, with grenades, and sometimes shoulder-fired rockets. And this was not unique to me. This is something that many soldiers who served in different units during Protective Edge described, that this is what we were told. We were told that in the neighborhoods that we were going into, there were no civilians. There were not supposed to be any civilians. One soldier who was given testimony to Breaking the Silence has described being in the Sojaiya neighborhood, also in the northern Gaza Strip, a different part of the Gaza Strip, that saw houses that were destroyed and half destroyed, entire streets that were totally shelled, and that they were told before that this neighborhood, there was not supposed to be any civilians in this neighborhood. They were all informed by leaflets, and it was supposed to be devoid of civilians. And the civilians who remained there were civilians who apparently chose to stay there. And obviously, there were civilians, you know, in both of the two neighborhoods that I was in. The elderly woman in the first neighborhood I was in was killed from the initial bombings. But in the Al-Bura neighborhood in Beit Hanun, the family survived the initial assault. And for days, they stayed in their house that was under control of my unit. And after 5 days after we left that neighborhood, the night after a young officer named Ro'i Peles was killed, we started walking out of the neighborhood, and as soon as we got a few hundred meters away from the neighborhood, those fighter jets came and they flew over the neighborhood and dropped bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb, obliterating the neighborhood and killing the family who stayed behind. Now, I don't know, and no one knows what their final moments were like, but I imagine perhaps after surviving so many weeks of fighting and bombing and shelling, that when the soldiers finally left their neighborhood, that there was a glimmer of hope for them, that they had made it, and they had made it to the end, and they had survived. But as soon as those fighter jets flew overhead with the loud roar of their engines, followed by deafening explosions that shook the earth, then that glimmer of hope was snuffed out, just like their lives were snuffed out. And I just wanted to share with you, after this powerful ceremony, this thought that I had really over the past few days, with discussions about fighter jets flying over Israel, like they do on every Independence Day tomorrow. They will fly over Israel, and millions of Israelis will look up to the skies when they hear the roar of those fighter jets. Fighter jets are in many ways the pinnacle of modern military might. And millions of Israelis will hear these sophisticated machines roaring through the skies, celebrating Israel and celebrating Israel's strength and displaying that strength. And maybe for many Israelis, these jets, fighter jets flying overhead, will elicit similar feelings to the feelings that I had as a 10-year-old in Manhattan in the days after the September 11th attacks, looking up to the sky, excited. I remember being excited to see these fighter jets flying over, because I knew that with all the chaos and fear and confusion around me, those fighter jets are there to protect me and to make me feel safe. But I know that those fighter jets will also be flying over territory where millions of Palestinians live under military control. And for them, no doubt, the roar of the fighter jets engines will not instill a sense of security or safety, but rather it will demonstrate to them our supreme military might as the nation that rules over them. And it's just another example of perhaps the most basic mission that soldiers are sent to do when they're deployed in the occupied territories, like I was for many, many months deployed in the West Bank, to go out on patrols, to go out and set up checkpoints, to demonstrate presence, to show the Palestinians who's ruling over them, to show them who owns the place, to create psychological pressure on them. And for them, there's no solace, there's no security, there's no space. There are no Palestinian 10-year-old kids, no Palestinian fifth graders in Hebron looking up at the sky at those fighter jets with any comfort, knowing that those machines are there to protect them and protect them in their homes. For them, those fighter jets are there to remind them that whatever safety they may feel in their own home, that the occupying power has the capability and the willingness, if necessary, to destroy that safe space for them. And for me, the dual experience of the current reality in which two populations, Israelis and Palestinians who live so close to each other geographically, have such opposite experiences and in some ways live in completely separate universes. And I think that the way we experience these fighter jets flying overhead is just one example of so many, is why this ceremony and this movement has been so crucial for me. Even before I joined Breaking the Silence and started leading tours and taking people to see the occupied territories with their own eyes, it was one of the most meaningful things I did after my service, as I started trying to grapple with what I had experienced and what I saw during my IDF service. And I think that it's so crucial that moving forward, that we find a way to understand and to push our societies to, and as an Israeli, to push my society to understand that all people deserve to live in the same safety that we crave so much, and we must stop denying that and understand that our safety cannot come by constantly denying safe spaces for millions of Palestinians. So thank you for joining me and joining us. And I'd love to open up the room to hear anyone's thoughts or comments or questions. And I'll let Ellie maybe say some final words and open up the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, it's so important to hear what you have to say, being there. We just read in the news, read the newspapers. We are away. We are not in the field, most of us. And it's so important that you tell the story. We need to hear the story. So please send question, comments. And in fact, you have an option of reaction. If you look, if you check down, you put your cursor down at the picture, at the bottom of the picture, it says more, and you go to reactions, and then you can have raise hand. and then we can see if anybody wants to talk. It doesn't have to be a question, can be a comment, whatever you would like to express. Elaine is asking, Benzi, if there's no communication between the pilots and the ground, such that if the people on the ground see people in the neighborhood that is supposed to be the target, to tell them not to bomb.
Yeah, Elaine, it's a good, important question. I don't know the answer to that question. I know obviously there is a certain degree, of course, there's communication between ground forces and the Air Force. Obviously, they otherwise they could bomb their own forces. And I know from testimonies that the Israeli Air Force does try in different ways to avoid killing civilians. But in my experience, I shared what I shared. I saw what I saw. I saw civilians who were killed. I know that families stayed in areas and stayed in neighborhoods that were completely obliterated by Israeli bombs. I don't have the answers to that question. I was just a regular infantry soldier, but I know what I saw.
I'll say that, let me, if people, there's a movie done by Steve Apcon about how Combatants for Peace started. And there is the testimony there of Asaf Yakubovich. And he was guiding the pilots where to bomb. And then he did his job. Then he went to his to a kind of a room where he could rest a little. And then he realized on TV that where he aimed the planes, it was bombing a school or something disastrous like that. And for him, it was just, sending messages, signals, and electronics, and the disaster on the ground. And that kind of caused him to say no more of that. And he was one of the founders of the Combatants for Peace. If I can ask, Benzi, if I can ask, are you in touch with your friends from the army? And what do they say if you are in touch with them? What do they say about what you're doing and the stories you're telling? Do they have the same feelings?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I served together with a small team of Special Forces soldiers. From my team, there are other testifiers in breaking the silence. Even one of my teammates named Ariel Bernstein, he's also worked with breaking the silence as an interviewer. There are other soldiers who I've served with who know about this story of this family, and I've never spoken to anyone who didn't think it was really, terrible. Not everyone that I served with agrees or supports breaking the silence, but I think overwhelmingly, we have a very close bond and respect each other. And I've met soldiers who I wasn't so close with, who served in units that were a little bit, who served in, different teams or units that weren't exactly my unit, who know of me and have attacked me personally, verbally. But in my team, for the most part, like I think most Israelis, people aren't involved so much. There's a lot of barriers to getting involved in political activism, that they don't want to speak out openly about this, and they're for whatever reason, whether they're afraid how it will affect their career, or you know, it's just they live in isolated and insulated from these types of discussions. So it's not something we talk about a lot, but anyone who I have spoken about it has also thought it's really, really messed up.
I must say that this issue of if you take a position, you're going to be hurt, maybe in your job or socially. This is something that we face every day, and some of us more than others. In Israel, the market is what, 80, 70, 80% the security and defense market, and we have jobs, and some people are afraid to take part in our activity because they're afraid that they'll be found out on the Facebook, whatever they do, that they criticize the political stand of the political direction where the government goes, and they just worry that they'll lose jobs or lose business, and that's really a problem. It's really a problem, and it seems to me that we can't expect to continue living like this, and not we have to pay somehow. We have to pay somehow in this conflict, in this fight. There's no way that it will stay the way it is. Yassine, you can unmute yourself, please.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please.
I'm actually all the way from South Africa, and you know, we can relate to the apartheid systems, you know, and 20 plus years later, the effects is still felt, you know, here in Cape Town and in the country. Firstly, I would like to commend you for the stance you're taking. I just got two questions I just wanted to ask. Firstly, you mentioned about steps that can be taken. I think myself being a Muslim, it is difficult to engage because through media and so forth, it creates these, I would say, this divide between Muslim and Jew. And then here you come and take the stance, and it gives us more insight and understanding, you know, to build the bridges. Because I think the enemy is the same, you know, in the sense of all humans should be treated fairly, you know, no matter what. So you mentioned lightly about what steps we can take. Is there any, if you could perhaps go a bit deeper into that, with regards to progress and moving and building bridges in order to overcome the situation we are in? Thank you.
Thank you, Yassine. I'll say I also see Itai in the chat asked in some ways a similar question. What I'll say is, first of all, it's important to understand what's actually going on. Like you said, sometimes in the media and social media, like there's so much noise and not actually discussing what is actually going on every day. And that's what I tried to do at the organization, breaking the silence, really bringing the description of what does actually the occupation look like every single day. What are Israeli soldiers being sent to do to Palestinians? And I think obviously initiatives like the one that we're a part of right now, put together by Combatants for Peace and the Forum for Bereaved Families. It's so crucial and so important to be part of these initiatives, so to support these initiatives and to learn from them and listen to people who are fighting for a better future, fighting for peace, and resisting oppression and the occupation in all forms. and partner, ally with those people and those groups and those movements. Support them and inform yourself about what's going on, and try to fight against the disinformation and misinformation and get a real picture, because people throw out slogans about fear and about security, and it's very oftentimes removed and detached from the reality on the ground. So listening to voices from the ground, listening to reading books and articles and about really describing what's going on in detail with sources, that is so crucial. So thank you for the question, Yasin and Itai.
Shelly, do you want to verbalize your question?
I can, if you want.
Please.
I'm interested, and thank you for presenting this. This is really helpful and informative. So I'm interested in the training. I was recently in Israel, and I was so surprised at how few people spoke Arabic, and how few people in the army spoke Arabic. And I thought, you know, it's such a small country. How is it possible that people don't speak one another's language? And what does that mean? You know, how do you understand another person's culture and have empathy when you're in the military and you're representing a country? How do you communicate if you don't speak one another's language? So I'm really interested in the training that you receive and how you cross over those enormous divides. And would you change that? Would it make it? Do you see that it would make an impact if it was a requirement in school that all children learn both languages?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shelly. And I'll say that I, like most Israeli soldiers deployed on the ground, barely spoke any Arabic, had minimal training in Arabic. I didn't go to Israeli school systems, but I also know that most Israelis, you know, even some that do take some Arabic classes, aren't proficient in Arabic at all. And what I will say about whether or not, you know, the IDF would improve or Israeli society would equip, you know, young soldiers to speak Arabic more proficiently, of course, it would make a difference on the ground. But I'll say that at the end of the day, I think that, you know, when I was in bombed out neighborhoods in northern Gaza and, you know, seeing, you know, the human toll and the Palestinians who were killed, and I was on patrols in the West Bank deliberately to make my presence felt. That was the goal that I was told to, that I'm supposed to show the Palestinians who's controlling them, and to remind them who's boss, who owns the place. That I don't think it would have mattered if I spoke Arabic any better or any worse. The primary language of the occupation, and the language that's most important in order to maintain the occupation, is the language of violence. And I think that in some ways, and I know this from testimony from one of the officers who used to be actually the spokesman for breaking the silence, named Dini Sakharov. He was an officer. He served in Hebron around the same time that I served. And in one of his testimonies, he describes at a checkpoint, a Palestinian coming through the checkpoint and giving an ID, a US ID. It was an American Palestinian young woman who was passing through, and she was frightened by the soldiers. And he describes, he actually went to high school in the US, so he speaks English with a perfect, you know, American accent. And he started calming her down, saying, you know, don't worry, everything is routine, there's nothing to worry about. And suddenly he realized that it seemed also bizarre that doing what he was doing, speaking in English with an American accent. And very powerfully, I think he said, I think if all the Palestinians spoke English with an American accent, I couldn't do this. And I think that at the end of the day, empathy with Palestinians would make the occupation so much harder, because we have to control these people by force. You know, their land and their resources are being diverted towards settlements for Israeli civilians. And in you know, in the extreme example, during these escalations, we're firing weapons at them, whether it's our rifles, or it's artillery shells, or it's Air Force dropping 1-ton bombs on residential neighborhoods. So of course, it's important to learn Arabic, and these types of initiatives, like those of Combatants for Peace and other joint co-resistance, like Yossi said in so powerfully during the ceremony. This is so important, and obviously, learning Arabic and learning about Palestinian culture for an Israeli is very important to facilitate co-resistance. But if learning the language is just facilitating being able to control and maintain military force, I don't think it will have any. I don't think it will really improve the situation in a significant way. Most Israelis who speak Arabic fluently are doing it because they're learning how to serve in the intelligence. Israeli Jews mostly who learn Arabic, it's a very security intelligence. You know, that's you know, that's why, and that's even in some of the books. I know there's a researcher named Yossi Mandel who has researched this topic. I read something that he wrote about this topic. But those are my thoughts, and based on my experience, kind of in the idea of what I think about that very interesting question.
Shelly, I'll add to it that again, I'll point to the movie, the great movie Disturbing the Silence of the Founding, this how Combatants was founded. And there, Avner Vishnitzer, one of our great founders that is still active 17 years, doesn't give up, amazing person. He says, you can kill a person only when you dehumanize him. And our job is to humanize the other side. And I think learning the language is the first step. I wanted to ask Benzi, you're doing talks in the US when you are in America, in the States. And I know, as far as I'm concerned, one thing that is very important is pressure from the outside on Israel politically. And it's very hard because if you criticize Israel in Germany or in the US, you are considered an anti-Semite. So how do you do that? How do you do that? What kind of reaction you get in US campuses?
Yeah, it's a good and important question. Of course, I am currently in the US, and I spoke recently at a few different college campuses, and last night I was in an event with New Israel Fund in Brooklyn. And of course, we need as much support as we can, and yeah, pressuring the Israeli government to take steps to end the occupation is primarily what we're trying to do here. We're searching for partners and allies and support in the Jewish diaspora and in the international community, because we know that this is an international conflict that's happening between Israel and the Palestinians, two different peoples. And we know that those who want to maintain the oppression of Palestinians are going and flying and meeting with allies, and they're enlisting support, financial support, political support, diplomatic support. You know, the head of Moetzet Yesha, this is the Judean Samaria Council, one of the most active groups in the West Bank that is working to dispossess, in many cases with horrific violence, Palestinians from their land, supporting these illegal outposts that are illegal according to Israeli law. They're meeting with dozens of members of Congress every year. And so we need to find allies as well. And we need to have people speak to their elected officials, to go to their communities and demand that those Jewish communities, those elected officials do not support continued occupation in any way, whether it's through voting, whether it's through ending financial support, or by just creating awareness publicly, educating. You know, that's what we need, and we need that with all the partners we can across the world. So please continue to be active with Breaking the Silence, with Combatants for Peace, with the Forum of Bereaved Families are doing such great work, and we're searching all the time for allies. I mean, I speak only for Breaking the Silence, but I know that also a lot of organizations, similar like-minded organizations, are also looking for support and alliances abroad.
Please do not forget Todd Miller. Yes.
So with this, I mean, I don't see any more questions.
No, there's Todd.
Todd, please. I didn't see
Yes.
that. I'm sorry.
Hi, Benzi. I'm from Queens, so a little affinity there. I lived in Manhattan also, and just I want to know a little bit more. It seems like Breaking the Silence and Combatants for Peace and the Bereaved Families Forum, it's such a powerful message that I can't believe it wouldn't reach the Israeli public. And I wonder if it's just that the message is not getting distributed well enough. So I wonder how much are these groups known within Israel? And a second question, if I can sneak one in, is have any of the members of Breaking the Silence gone into politics? That might be a way of raising the issue more to the visibility.
Yeah, Todd, this is a good question. Unfortunately, the message doesn't get out. People hear about Breaking the Silence. Everyone knows about Breaking the Silence in Israel. It's a household name, but no one's heard the message of Breaking the Silence. Everyone has heard a message about Breaking the Silence from the former Prime Minister Netanyahu, or from the current Prime Minister Bennett, or from the current Minister of Interior Ayelet Shaked, or even from the centrist Minister and Prime Minister to be Yair Lapid, who've all joined forces over the recent years to demonize and to delegitimize groups like Breaking the Silence, groups like Combatants for Peace, so that people won't even get a chance to hear this message. And I agree with you. I was struck by the messages of Combatants for Peace and of Breaking the Silence in the years after my service, and I was lucky to somehow break through that that huge wall of bias and smear and misinformation that is built around organizations like Breaking the Silence, who are told just outright lies and outright distortions of everything that we do. I'll just share one powerful experience that I had at the very beginning of my work at Breaking the Silence, just going to an event where in Washington University, where Israeli exchange students came, and they came because they wanted to protest. They thought that I was going to say all sorts of terrible things. And at the end of the event, they said, I completely didn't understand what breaking the silence was. And I actually agree with most of what you said. And I would even consider joining and giving testimony. But it's so, we're constantly doing tours. We're constantly taking people out there, but it's still so hard to get past this, this wall of misinformation. And I do think, we are working closely. I don't think there's anyone who was ever involved in breaking the silence who's run for office yet. But there are people who have left, the organization. I mean, as an organization, we're also working in the Knesset. We also with Combatants for Peace. And possibly also the parents circle. Speaking at Knesset conferences, trying to get this message across, at every platform we can. I actually met Ellie. I met Ellie at a protest outside of the Knesset a few months ago, where sorry, I met Erez. I met Erez, not Ellie. I met Ellie just now in preparation for this ceremony and this meeting. But you're absolutely right. We need allies in the Knesset, and we need allies in diaspora communities. We need allies in Queens. I'm in Queens right now. There is so much that, so much weight that U.S. politics and U.S. Communal institutions have on impacting the ground and tilting it in the favor of those who want to continue this oppression, the occupation, and those who want to end it. And so we need all the help we can get, and we're open for all suggestions and collaborations. And I'm sure the other organizations sponsoring this ceremony are also likewise.
Okay, Benzi, maybe I can just add that we had 4 members of parliament of the Knesset in our event today. Gabi Lasky and Ovir Kasif and Musi Raz and one more Islam, and an Arab member of parliament. I think she's from the Labour Party. And and having them in the coalition is amazing. I'll just tell you that I accompany shepherds, Palestinian shepherds, every week in the West Bank. And whenever I have a problem with soldiers, with police, I call Gabi Lasky, I call Musi Raz, and they on the spot can call the defense minister office or something and do something. So they are very, very, very helpful. And they help us, and we should help them get stronger in their parties, because occupation is not the first priority on the list of the parties. And really, the important thing is that you really help us from wherever you are and however you can. And I know in the US, it's sending letters to the members of the House of Representatives.
Congress.
To the Congress, and it's extremely important that you'll put the pressure, because without the US, we are not going to do much. So you have a very powerful thing in your hands, and we really hope that you'll use it. I think so. Please keep in touch. You can see our newsletters. You can check our website. You can
I ask a question?
join, and you can even donate. It will be helpful. Carol, somebody else wants to talk?
Oh, yes.
Last minute.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you probably, okay, let's
Go
speak
ahead.
like right to the nitty gritty.
Please.
Listen, I'm first generation after the Holocaust, okay? And I'm indoctrinated with the idea that it won't be a Jewish country anymore, okay, after the Holocaust. You understand that fear. Did you address, you probably did address that fear, because, I'm afraid to join an organization where I'm setting up Israel to not exist anymore. I mean, how can I want to help you, because I don't like this occupation stuff. So how can I join, yet not think that I'm actually working to destroy the Jewish people. Okay, that's the nitty gritty. You understand the question? It's fair.
Benzi, you want to answer?
Yeah, sure. I'll just
Sure.
say that I think that if you don't want to, I share your fear. I don't want Israel to be destroyed, and I think that if we don't end the occupation, Israel will be destroyed, because controlling by force millions of people through military might is the greatest threat to the future of this country. As I live, I'm visiting in the US now, but I do live in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I was muted by accident.
Oh,
And for me, when I reflect and reflect on my own experiences in 8 years of 8 months serving in the West Bank, and the weeks that I spent in the Gaza Strip, I realized that this is not, and I read testimonies from hundreds of other soldiers who served over the past 20 years in the occupied territories. This is not about protecting Israel and or not exclusively or not primarily about protecting Israel from existential threats. This is about a project to control an entire territory with millions of people living in it. And like you said, you don't want to, you recognize that this is horrible. And I think that one of the greatest tools that those who want to maintain the occupation is the tool that they use to conflate supporting Israel and supporting the safety of millions of Jews who live in Israel with not criticizing or not speaking out or not leveraging our political power to call for an end to the occupation. And I think we have to delve into what's actually going on the ground and see through that, because I think the future is the stakes are too high to not be critical and think kind of lucidly about what we're doing and where we're going. I think that silencing ourselves and not talking about the problems of Israeli policies and not fighting our hardest to solve those problems, that is truly the greatest victory we can give to anti-Semites or to those who want to destroy Israel and endanger the lives of Israelis. So I really think that the work that we're doing here is the greatest thing to fight for a good future for Israelis and Palestinians with peace and security, and like I was talking about during the talk, the safe spaces, safety, security for all of us.
do you have an email address so I can talk with you further?
Sure, I'll just type it in the chat.
I hope I can.
It's
I can see
Benzi
it.
at
The chat.
You're writing, Benzi? Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Benzi at shuvrimshtika.org. There you go.
Benzi, thank you very much.
Got it. Thank you.
Really very informative, and to hear from somebody who was on the battlegrounds, that's what we wanted. And I'm sure that everybody understands that we cannot continue this violence, and there will be no peace until this conflict is solved. We cannot stay an occupier. We are committing war crimes, being occupiers. And we don't like that. And everybody wants a safe and independent Israel. So with that, peace, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Benzi, where are you? Benzi, Mai, Avi, Eli, where are you?
יצאו.
Yitzu. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Sorry for the